name's John Langan, and I've lived in Kentish town because I don't consider what is called Gospel Oak now as being Gospel Oak at all. For 60 years, we're a little bit of time off for 6-7 years in Yorkshire.
My name's Maggie Mendy. I've always lived in Camden, and for the last maybe 45 years I've lived in the Gospel Oak area.
When I was born, my parents lived in Leighton Road, that's the other side of Kentish Town. Then we moved from over there, Leighton Road, to Alma Street. Alma Street's very kind of posh now, very expensive houses in it. But when I was younger, that weren't the case. The poshest person in the street was like a teacher.
Everybody knew everybody else's children. I was always actually quite surprised when an adult would say to me, "I know who you are, I'm going to tell your mother." It was very vibrant when I was a child. Everybody knew everybody. It actually, we used to go shopping with my mum on a Saturday, like all young people did, and it would take a number of hours to go from one end of the market to the other, because it was a place, it was a social thing. And we used to stand and think, "Oh God, she's talking to somebody else." But you know, we knew everybody as well.
I'm Ed Berman, the Chief Executive and founder of Interaction, and therefore of the City Farm. Before we actually formally became a charity, a registered charity, we were working, a number of us, in Notting Hill at the Mercury Theatre, and a number of us wanted to do both community work and experimental theatre and so on. So we all moved to Kentish Town. We then started to take over derelict properties that the council owned. And one of them was the building on the farm.
I believe that they went and went round the pub to see Ed Berman and the other Interaction people who didn't mind a light hour, you know what I mean? And I think the discussion went somewhat along the lines of, "Oh, you've got all that land over there in the timber yard. My dad used to grow stuff in the back garden during the war and all that. We all live in flats. None of us have got gardens. Let's start some allotments up there." And they go, "All right." And the idea of the farm animals, I think, was probably Ed's idea.
So we moved into that building, which still exists, and I walked around one day and I looked around and I said, "Gee, there are stables here." And then I had the brilliant idea to use those stables as stables. It's really a stroke of genius, you know. And so I said, "What do you put in a stable?" "Well, probably horses." I
was working on the building site where Crestfield Close is. I was bricklaying on there, and was working for Interaction at the same time. And I was doing some temporary work, covering for the man who was the stockman here, working on a Saturday, so he could have a day off. You know, I'd be quite honest. You know, doing this was better than having your ass up in the air 10 hours a day down a trench. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, people were amazed at the crazy idea of setting up a farm, you know, so you'd ring a company that dealt in sand and land and say, "You know, can I have a couple of tons of sand, please?" "What? What do you want it for?" I said, "Well, I want to cover over our indoor riding school with something nicer than what we've got there." So an indoor riding school? Only the Queen has an indoor riding school in London. I said, "Well, there's another one coming up, but we won't compete, don't worry." We were very keen on community action because the attitude at the time was, generally speaking, that people waited for the council to do something and to offer them things. It was a very centralised non-participatory thing, and that isn't the view or the vision that I had about the way society should operate. There were a lot of things emerging at the time and moving around. There was a lot of action from the late 60s onwards. Around us was the largest squat in the country, in Kentish Town.
I came into the area from Haverstock Hill in 1970. I moved into Estelle Road in early 1970. I managed to get a bed sit not far from this farm, but the landlord was dreadful. The landlords in those days could do pretty well what they pleased. He used to come into my room. He had a pass key and he just came in whenever he wanted. I was not allowed any visitors after 10, no men. I bumped into a really attractive young man, fell in love with him, and Ian said, well, you know, your landlord is dreadful, why don't you come down and you'll be able to play music and have parties and enjoy your life.
On the island of Prince Wales Crescent was where most of the squatting went on. And so people like Sid Raw, who, he self-penned King of the Hippies, you know.
It was a kind of new age type community, which was so relaxed and so different from the restrictive kind of old school style that I think it attracted a lot of young people.
So within the squats you had different communities of people. There were not stereotypes. There was a house full of the heavies, and then there was a house full of the cycle mechanics, and then there was a house full of the vegans, and then there were the students.
The people who were squatting there, they used to go in the pub, the same as everybody else used to go in the British Queen, you know what I mean? And they used to use old Cyril Wells's shop, and they would, but they, you know, that was the first time anyone had ever seen brown rice. The community supplies was there.
We were living in rough housing conditions, though we improved them, and we were not living in the squalor that local people thought we were living in. They'd been moved out of houses because they were squalid, but we turned those houses into very nice places to live. And in our house we put in a bathroom, which everybody came to use. It was lovely. Baths became times for feasting and enjoyment and listening to music and playing instruments. It was very creative.
I mean, my mates going, squatters, they, you know, what are they doing? Don't wash and all that. But I say, no, it's not like that. I say, no, you're all right. And, you know, and that people's attitudes change very quickly. Especially, especially if you've got a mole. I was a mole, I think, you know what I mean?
And then, of course, there was the public laundry. But that was hilarious because the local people were convinced that they would pick diseases off us. And so there's a wonderful article in my collection about the laundry lepers, because the Camden eventually had to provide us with our own washing machine because the local people wouldn't wash their clothes in the same machine as us.
There was a lot of older people who kind of looked down their nose at what was going on there, and, you know, they're not paying rent, you know, and all of this sort of stuff. But I think anybody that was really forward thinking was understanding that, well, actually, you know, do they have somewhere to live? And if they don't have somewhere to live and these places were vacant, why not?
The neighbours, of course, were not too happy, but that was more because their community was being destroyed.
Get some concrete mix and fill your back door up with bricks, and you better be there waiting when I get my business fixed.
Well, you know, there was large estates built. Where the Tibbles was at the other end of Queen's Crescent, not the market end, the other end. it was mostly houses. In fact, the whole of Queen's Crescent, behind Queen's Crescent, was houses. Lismore Circus was really nice, and there was houses in rows that came up to the circus. So quite a lot of housing was removed, and large estates of flats were built.
The housing did, on the one hand, break up communities, because to move people out and then knock down those buildings and build ones again disrupted that community, sometimes completely.
In the old days, you'd see people outside, blacking their doorsteps and polishing their doorsteps, and very, their houses were very nice and they were well kept. And I think when you live on a large estate, it's, if somebody doesn't do something, then why should you? And there's that kind of attitude. And I think it just completely fragmented the old community that was there, because people were moved all over the place.
There was a plan to knock down all of West Kentish town, so we're talking about from Mansfield Road up to Southampton Road, down over the other side into towards Maitland Park, from there to Hawley Road, knocked the lot down. The people in Oak Village, they went to the High Court about that, and that kind of put the kibosh really on that kind of compulsory purchase and so-called slum clearance, because these houses weren't slums. They were well built, substantial houses, and they'd been there for 100 years. They had gardens front and back, and the roads were nice wide roads and all that. So it was kind of it was quite a nice area,
The estate took so long to be built because there were problems with builders. It was built in the way it's named now. You have Gospel Oak 7 and 8, you have Wendling, you have Danton. So it wasn't all built at once, and it took a long time to be built because it was started in around 1970-71, and it was still being built in 78. But there was a lot of fury, sound and fury about the Gospel Oak estate, because a lot of housing was left derelict and kids would set fire to it, and that was Ed Berman coming in the middle of all that and realising children needed somewhere to go.
I wanted to create a space that was useful for local people. This was a bomb site from the Second World War. So we decided that we would try to get local people involved in getting it renovated and taking it over to build a centre on it, plus facilities for the local community. We started by getting the rubble cleared as a summer play scheme, and I guess we built the first, what I call the dramascape, a dinosaur, and we had stories that kids made up about dinosaur, and they built this huge dinosaur that they could have as an adventure playground and so on, and that carried on various summers.
There were also some street festivals that had happened at that time. First Burst and Nuts in May. That was all very good round here, and the people went mad at Pram Race and everyone. So there were some pubs left open around it. And that was a community festival. So all the it was kind of stimulated a bit by interaction. They went round and said, "Do you think it'd be a good idea if we had a community festival?" And by this time, the community had been galvanised into wanting to have some action. Do you know what I mean? They weren't in that torpid state anymore. They'd seen what had gone on down there, and they were ready for things to go. Let's have fun here,
Let's go!
Down Tallica Road, that was when they had the 15-seater bicycle. It's impossible to cycle it. It's just too heavy. It was about this high off the ground and mini wheels on it, It was quite, but and turning it, that was impossible. Especially when we had a few pints, Pram race, of course, was very popular, you know, and they are popular. It's not so popular with the pubs that are towards the end of the pram race. It's very popular at the beginning.
There would be the guy or the woman. It seemed to be mostly men who did this. The guy in the pram would dress as a baby, and the person who pushed the pram would be dressed as the mother. And then, of course, there was the tug of war between the squatters and the locals, and we were, of course. What happened was we were losing, and so everybody else joined in, and then, of course, we were disqualified because we cheated.
It was good, but the festivals were great. They were great, you know. They last a couple of days, and everybody would have a good time, and would really look forward to what was going to happen next year.
And the first burst was a way of mixing. That was actually very successful.
It gets us away from the television. It's got us out for the evening. It's made us wash our face and hands.
There was a change because people were willing to take things on and not just take what was given them, and I think we were partially responsible for that. There were other people and agencies in the area that were also ginger groups for different small interest groups, but they did their job too.
So they had all this stuff here, so there were people here all the time, right? And they were still working out of Dalby Street. So the youths that were at Dalby Street would kind of gravitate up here. The local community are starting to want to find out what's going on and how they can be involved. So that's how that community work started off. By this time, all the remote pastures and allotments had gone because they were on where the houses are now. And the farm had developed from being kind of a bit of an ad hoc, do what you want place, you know, a bit of gardening, a bit of, a bit of free school, into something that was much more educationally valuable. And they, you know, it proved to be very popular locally. And then this guy Richard left, and his job was stockman stroke youth worker, which is what my job is. And I had quite a lot of previous experience doing youth work, and quite enjoyed doing the work here. So I applied for his job. I interviewed and got it. And the question about, what are you going to do about the animals? I said, well, I'm sure you can go to college or something. Interaction Trust split into two halves, and the bit that stayed here in the purpose-built centre was farm, community work, weekend arts college, all the stuff that was more relevant to being here locally, and that's when the farm devolved in '89. What is going back to what happened with interaction? Everybody's equal. Everyone has a value. Everyone's value is of equal value. And we tried. So you've seen that room over there. Everybody's there. Again, it doesn't matter. That's what hasn't changed. The ethos is the buildings change, and the trees change, and the landscape changes, but the ethos, the idea doesn't change. The idea of allowing people to have responsibility is still as current as it was 40 years ago.